Ono sono pesha achecha v'chatosom ki ro'o gemolucha. At the very end of Parshat Vayechi, which is in fact the closing lines of the whole book of Bereshis, we find a very fascinating and interesting episode between Yosef and his brothers. Yakov has died, he's been mourned, and they've taken him on a levaya from Egypt to Hebron to be buried in Ma'aras Machpelah, and now they're all back in Egypt. And Yosef is the all-powerful viceroy of the country, and the brothers are fearful of their lives. Clearly they feel that so long as Yakov was alive, they were protected from Yosef's possible feelings of revenge against them by the presence of their father. But now he's no longer there, what's going to be? So they send this message to their brother, to Yosef. Ono sono pesha achecha v'chatosom. They say, Ovicho tzivo, your father, before he died, he left this message. And he begged you, please forgive your brothers, ki ro'o gemolucha, all the evil, all the bad that they intended to do to you by selling you as a slave and attempting to get rid of you. Now here's a very interesting fact, that really we don't find that Yaakov said that, and indeed Rashi, amazingly, follows a Gemara in Yevamos Samach Beis, which says this is an example of what we might call a white lie. In other words, really, they were not telling the absolute truth. They were saying that really Yaakov begged Yosef to forgive the brothers, but in fact, Yaakov had never said that. Now, Yosef knows that his father never said that for one very simple reason. Yosef never told his father what had happened to him. And the brothers clearly had never told their father. And the Ramban also tells us that in his opinion, Yaakov, to the very end of his life, he never knew the real story about what had happened to Yosef. He never knew what the brothers had said. Yosef didn't want to tell his father because it was a type of Lashon Hara which he couldn't do anything about at all anymore, and he knew the brothers had repented their Aveira, and there would be no reason to do so. Nevertheless, the brothers sort of assumed that their father knew about it. Incidentally, one of the clearest proofs that Yaakov never knew about the Mechiras Yosef, about what the brothers of Yosef had done to Yosef, is the fact that when he gives them one by one different blessings and different rebukes in Parshas Vayechi, he doesn't mention at all what they have done to Yosef. Clearly, if he mentions the Shechem episode with Shimon and Levi, he surely should have rebuked them for attempting to get rid of Yosef, and he doesn't. Clearly, he never knew about it. So Yosef, when he hears this, he knows that this is not true. And that's really Yaakov, that's really Rashi's interpretation, that this is mutar l'shanos mipnei hashalom, in order to avert a danger or damage or disaster, one's allowed to say a white lie, not in order to benefit in any way materially, not in order to deceive somebody else into doing something they don't want to do, but in order to avert danger. There is the concept, which is both morally and halachically occasionally permitted in extreme circumstances, of mutar l'shanos mipnei hashalom. That's the Gemara in Yevamos, and that's Rashi at the end of this week's Parsha. However, I'd like to suggest a slightly different understanding of this statement, that it wasn't really a lie at all. It wasn't really a lie, but it really requires us to understand a little bit better an earlier pasuk in Parshas Vayechi. In Parshas Vayechi, before he starts giving the brachas one by one to all his sons, he says to them, Hey osvu v'agidu lachem, eis asher yikra eschem la'achris hayomim, hikovtzu b'nei Yakov, he asks them to gather together, and then he will tell them, eis asher yikra lachem b'achris hayomim. So the word acharit hayamim is actually a code word, which doesn't mean at some later date. He doesn't say, let me tell you what's going to happen later on in history. Acharis hayomim is a much more profound idea in the Torah, which means the end of days, meaning the ultimate end of history, the goal to which everything goes, the geula acharona, the ultimate redemption, which is described in Yeshaya and in Zechariah and in other Nevi'im, the way in which the world will come together in Bayom Ahu Yeh Hashem Echad U'Shmo Echad, a idyllic, utopian world joined together in Emunah HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is the vision of Yemos HaMashiach in all its details. Chazal say that Yaakov wanted to tell them about the advent of Mashiach and Achris Hayomim. He wanted to tell them how exactly history will unfold, but Nistamay Memenu Ashchina, that actually fact HaKadosh Baruch Hu took away his Ruach HaKodesh from him to prevent him from saying this. This is in itself a very interesting idea, which I'm not going to go into in detail at the moment, but clearly it's not in our best interests to know the future. The future is something which we create, that we live in the world of Bechira and human decisions, and if we would know for certain what the future holds for us, this would paralyze us. It's tempting, and it's always been a great temptation to go to oracles and read the stars and ask people for future predictions, but predictions are actually not useful and not productive for human beings. We have to live in the world where we make decisions and we create the future, not predict the future. And therefore Yaakov's nevuah of the future, of the Achris Hayomim, was nistama mimenu. It was withheld from him, that he couldn't share it with his sons. But what's happened here is another interesting message is he's given to them is that the future, one thing from this pasuk is becoming clear. He osfu v'agidu lachem. He kovtzu. He uses two different Hebrew words. Leheosef, to gather together. He kovtzu, to come together as a group. The exact differences between these two words, you can look at the Mefarshim, but the one point is very clear. He's saying to them that in order to create the future that will be Am Yisrael, which will be the Jewish people in the land of Israel and being a light to the nations, one thing needs to be clear, and that is He'osfu and Hikovtzu. That Klal Yisrael have to unite together and work together as a unit. It's the unity of Klal Yisrael which is crucial. And I'd like to suggest that when the brothers at the end of Vayechi, they say to Yosef, your father told us, please forgive us for what we have done for you, they weren't telling a lie. They were saying to him, remember that your father commanded us, He'osfu v'agidu lachem, that the future requires us to be all united together, ba'ahava, ba'achva, v'shalom, v'reus. We need to work together as one people. And therefore, please forgive us. Son or pesha achecha, you have to forgive us. And that is really not a lie at all. They're simply interpreting Yaakov's dying wishes on the last day of his life in Parshat Vayechi to remind Yosef that achdus is what we need, and therefore, son or pesha achecha, that's only going to happen if you can enable yourself with an act of supreme forgiveness to overcome all the hurt and suffering that you have endured at our hands and come together with us as one unit. Yosef completely and utterly forgives them, and he says to them, Atem chashavtem l'ro'ah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu chashav l'teva. Yosef is able to say to them, look, God's plans was only for the good. It's true your intentions were bad, and therefore that's between you and God. You have to do tshuva for your intentions. But the end result was good for all of us, and therefore you need to have no fear from me at all. Going forward, we can work ba'achdus. It leaves a little bit of a question, which is an interesting one. Why, in fact, if Yaakov wants to emphasize the unity of Klal Yisrael, why does he separate them one from another and give them each their own individual destiny and individual definitions and individual brachas, ishka, berchosa, beirach, oso? Why doesn't he just bench them as a group? Why does he personalize it so much? And this question becomes more acute even later on in the Midbar, in the desert, where Moshe Rabbeinu decides to have them encamped Lishvotov. Each tribe is separate with their own leader and their own nasi and their own flag. Personally, if I would have taken the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim, I would have said to them, forget tribalism, forget all these different Shvatim. We are now working, all of us together, and let's put that all behind us, and we can work together as one unit. Clearly, the Torah wants to tell us that actually individualism is not a bad thing. That actually each Shevet has its own uniqueness and has its own role to play. And therefore, the Shvatim have to be encamped separately. But the key here is, how do we attain unity if we value individuality? And the answer is Misoviv la Mishkan Yachanu. They can camp all separately, provided they are all surrounding the Mishkan. The Mishkan representing the Emunah and the Avodat Hashem of each and every one of them. That will unite us. We may not be united in the sense that we're all the same, but we are united by a value system, by an Emunah, by Yiras Shamayim, by a sense of being Avdei Hashem. And I think this is really in the Pasuk here, when the brothers speak to Yosef, and they say, your father said, Ono sono pesha achecha, ki ro'ah gemalucha. They call themselves achecha when they tell him what Yakov had said. Yakov had said, don't forget the achva, the brotherhood. The brotherhood is the key to the unity of Klal Yisrael going forward, the strength of the power of Am Yisrael. But then they says, oh no, sono pesha, it doesn't say achecha, it says, va'ata sono lepesha avdei Elohei ovicha. In other words, even if the achva is not strong enough to hold us all together, because we are all different, but we are all avdei Elokei ovicha. What unites us is that we are Avdei Hashem, Elokei Ovicha, the God that Yakov had taught us about. So we are united by a value system, by the Yud Gimel Ikrim of Torah Min HaShamayim and Emunah HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Borei Olam, and that can create an achdus which actually enhances all the individuality between us. And I just want to give you one very small illustration of that in halacha, and that is that in Orach Chaim, in Shulchan Aruch, Orach Chaim, Hilchos Tefillah, Siman Tzadi, it speaks about davening in a Beit HaKnesses, which has got chalonot. It's important to have chalonot. It's based on a Gemara and a Pasuk in Daniel, subject for a different shir, but interestingly, the Gemara simply says there should be chalonot for various reasons. What's interesting is Rabbi Yosef Karo, when he comes to write the Shulchan Aruch, he says there should be 12 chalonot in shul. Why 12 chalonot? That's not brought in the Gemara anywhere. The answer is it comes from the Zohar. And the Zohar is written, a shul ideally should have 12 windows. Why? Because of the 12 tribes that the Zohar says, the Bashabayim, that in heavens, in some sense mystically, there are 12 windows, because the tefillas from each different shevet arrive b'shamayim in a different route. And I find that very fascinating, because what's happening here is it's accrediting and accepting that there is Sfard and Ashkenaz and Eidot HaMizrach and all sorts of different types of Nuschat Tefillah, and they indeed go through a different route and go through a different chalon, but they all arrive at the Kisei HaKavod. They are united by the Emunah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We are all Avdei Elokei Yakov. And that unites us despite our differences. So Yaakov is indeed respecting the differences of Reuven, Shimon, Levi, each one is separate. But He'osru v'agidu lachem, the key is that unity. And that's what the brothers were saying at the very end. Avi chotziva, your father commanded us that we have to remain united. And therefore, sono pesha achecha, the only way to do that is with an act of forgiveness and a sense that diversity within Klal Yisrael, united by the Yesodei Hadat. That is the key to the strength of Klal Yisrael, and going forward, the key to bringing the Geula Achrona Ba'achris Hayomim. Amen.